This is Michael DC Bowen for Cobb Vision. Good morning. I am talking today to help out a friend, an acquaintance, who is a journalism student, and he's researching the Black Blogosphere. So I thought I'd take a moment, or several moments, to talk about it, and for the sake of posterity, fill in some blanks that you probably wouldn't understand if you just came at it as a student, or whether casual or not. I gave parts of this details to a writer for the LA Times who was in the Atlanta bureau, but it never made it to press. And I thought it was a pretty interesting commentary. I spent about an hour or so on the phone with him. And I'd like to just go back to the beginning of time. First of all, let me talk about my own role. I began my online career before there was an internet. I was at Xerox in the CIN, was what we called it, CIN, the corporate intranet. And we did email. I was doing email back in 1986, perhaps even earlier than that. It's hard to say. Those memories are selective and sometimes foggy as far as dates are concerned. But we had a Xerox Black Network, all areas, and prior to that there was something called BNet, and BNet was a distribution list that ran out of MIT. I remember BNet AI MIT.prep or something of that nature. And that was an academic network primarily set up for blacks who were in graduate programs to discuss various topics, some of which would be social or political. I was a latecomer to BNet, probably didn't get on that until 84 or 86, somewhere in that time. And then I, of course, wanted to talk about culture and politics. And you should remember that at that time compute power was pretty low as compared to what it is today. So the very idea that a scientific network would be used to talk about politics was pretty much anathema. It was like, stay off our networks, don't clog it up with this stochastic stuff where you're talking about politics and black racial politics. My God. But I continued rather unabated and unembarrassable, considering some of the things I wanted to talk about on BNet and then on the Black Network within Xerox. I became the moderator ultimately, and there were about 400, maybe 600 people on that network, which was a good-sized network, but probably small certainly small compared to the Black Blogosphere. So my first serious writing started with, and my own writing career in terms of public speaking and writing began somewhere around there, 86, 87, 88, somewhere around there. And what happened was Usenet, which was the news groups, which Google has taken over, nicely actually I might add, was the main place where all kinds of public discussions took place over these computer networks before the internet was born, and it was considered loud and raucous and unruly and full of flame wars, people who didn't know what they were talking about, who did not use netiquette, which was a word we don't even talk about netiquette anymore. Because there was some sense of propriety in the net. It was our network, these are our computers, this is very costly to talk to people, and you should use it the proper way. And of course I was an adherent of netiquette to a certain extent, until my ox was gored and somebody told me I shouldn't be talking about race and politics and religion and philosophy on these networks. And so Usenet, I was a latecomer to BNet, and then I became the moderator ultimately. I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator. I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, I became the moderator, and then on the Black Network within Xerox, at some point came up with one of the Rec Arts Music, I think it was. Some white kid said rap isn't music and it's stupid and blah 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 blah, and I responded actually in a poem. And I wasn't a subscriber to Usenet at the time. I did it through a friend. I think his name, his pseudonym was Sir Leb, and he was actually one of the guys, a funk meister who wrote liner notes for Parliament Funkadelic on their albums. And so I got into this exchange, and I was like, oh, well, there's something bigger than the Xerox Black Network, where there's actually thousands of people. And so that continued. One of the names of the pioneers, there's a couple pioneers that you probably will get in the histories, but I want to make sure that their names are mentioned. One of them is Carter Bing. Carter Bing, I believe, is in North Carolina or South Carolina. And he was an administrator on a college campus, like many of the people who ran network and mailing lists and distribution lists. And Carter Bing started something called the Drum. And the Drum was one of the first major African-American oriented networks for communicating nationwide. And we started talking about politics, and I was probably one of the notable writers in that era. I, at the time, went by the name of Michael X, and I was among a lot of friends. One of my friends was known as the ARPA arsonist, and we would just get into these flame wars for the sake of flaming and arguing and spewing. And we knew we had a closed audience, and we weren't really responsible. We just wanted to get our ideas and viewpoints out there. And so Carter Bing facilitated that with the Drum, which was one of the first bulletin board services. Somewhere around '88, I picked up a copy of Harper's Magazine. And my background from this was that I was in the computer science realm, and we were all still geeks at the time, and I likened us to monks because we thought the rest of the world was illiterate, and we held the Holy Scriptures in our hands, and we, at some day after these dark ages when everybody would have computers, that our work would be seen for the magnificence that it was. And there was this, so we were always fighting, against the proposition that we were all geeks and we had no social lives, when in fact we had very robust social lives, the kind of which that most people are just beginning to experience today, where you can email or instant message someone, where you could trade facts and opinions instantly with people no matter where they were, in text, which has its own dynamic, which provides something that you can't get with video, something that you can't get with just audio. And we were early emailers, and we knew spam, and we understand all this stuff that the larger society is now experiencing. So as a scientist and a geek and a monk, I had this desire and a feel to combat that stereotype and try to understand what it was that liberal arts students, actually studied that gave them any edification whatsoever, considering their lack of technical skills and ability to follow logic. So I subscribed to the Three Penny Review, which was a poetry periodical in California, and also to Harper's. And one day, Harper's had this story on the well, and I was, shocked and amazed. It's one of the two great stories out of Harper's that I recall. The other being Shelby Steele, but that's another story. And they interviewed the founders, obviously, probably Howard Rheingold. And so I immediately had to find out what this well thing was and get into it, because part of the problem was, again, the society of computerists were not particularly interested in politics, and I was interested in art, and I was trying to find out what the other half understood that made what they knew to be valuable anyway. And there was something that I think either Descartes or Voltaire had written about the sum of knowledge, where they spent one half of their life trying to figure out things technically and the other half studying politics and philosophy. And he had a famous quote about it actually coming full circle, that he understood and intuited things from both sides. And I was looking for that kind of that great closed circle in my own knowledge. And so I started becoming, I was always philosophical, but I wanted to really understand the liberal arts. And so here was the well where people were dedicated to talking about politics, and they were journalists, so they got that kind of coverage. Excuse me. So I joined the well as soon as possible, because I had joined FidoNet and a lot of other bulletin board services, and I said, one of these days people are going to talk politics and stuff like this on the net. And I got on the well and racked up these huge bills, but I was really in my element. Finally, I was watching people have really meaningful discussions, intellectual discussions of the sort that I could get if I went to a seminar, but these just kept going on and on and on and on and on. And it was there that I met virtually some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met. Because when you have a virtual presence, it eliminates distance, and you know where to go. So I met Gerard Vanderloon there, among other folks, and of course Howard, and Jim Rutt, and oh goodness, people whose pseudonyms I remember, but it has been a long time. But Farai Chidea was also there, among other folks, and Bill Berry. And so I got into the well, and I was discussing things there, and I had a falling out with the liberals there. And although I didn't realize it was a liberal kind of thing, because I really didn't understand conservative values or what conservatives were on about at the time. So I felt a kind of isolation there. And so I went back to SCAA. Now here's a new chapter. I don't have a nice segue right now. But SCAA was Silk Culture African American. And SCAA was really the first large black presence in the internet before the World Wide Web was born. And I've been saying internet, but I mean it interchangeably with World Wide Web, where people start publishing web pages. So SCAA was dominated by a dozen or two focused writers, some of them who are good friends of mine to this day. Charles Isbell, the homeboy from hell, was one of my good buddies. Kenny Crudup, also one of my good buddies. Lester Spence, Ed Brown. It's too many folks to mention, but those four, I would say, are my best buddies from there. But we had Berlinda Radney was there. Oh geez, I should have written a list of names here so that I could really get into it. But we had some remarkable discussions. A guy named James White was there, and of course we had our antagonist, the Bard, racist, but he kept us going. I mean, he really energized the place with his negative energy, and we were all combating him. And it raised very interesting issues about free speech and what could be said in a public forum, and what kinds of recourse you had in terms of when you had somebody who was genuinely a racist, or someone who appeared to be a racist and wanted to get your blood up. And there was that same kind of paternalism when you talked about, when people were saying, this person has talked about my mother, has insulted me in the worst way possible, let's mail bomb him. Let's mail this guy a virus. Let's do something like that. And all of a sudden, these quote-unquote neutral people who had ownership of Usenet would say, oh, no, you can't do that. And it was rather amazing to see that you could allow racist speech, but you could not allow conspiratorial speech to punish a racist. So kind of the question of free speech was really first raised in SCAA because it was a place that we wanted, because there was kind of a diaspora of black students, and these were mostly college students, although I was long out of college, who wanted to hook up with other black college students. I mean, they were saying, I'm in the University of Minnesota, and I hate it here, and I wish I was back home, and I don't have anybody to talk to, so they'd get online and go to SCAA, and we'd be talking about the best recipe for corn muffins. And that was Ed Brown's famous Jiffy comparison. And we had great discussions. But the problem was, over time, the quality of discussions would degrade because more and more flamers would come in, and especially during Black History Month, where we get people from alt.flame.nigger to come over and cross-post, because you would have multiple groups, obviously, and you could do cross-posting between the news groups, where you would have communities clashing and other things. I became ultimately one of the keepers of the FAQ, the FAQ, for SCAA, and we generated about 80, 90 different questions to which there were answers. And this became something that I was like, this is very interesting, because what happens in any news group or any group where you're having online discussions is there would be people who really know what they're talking about, and then a bunch of newbies who would come in who don't know what they're talking about. And after about 6 months or a year, I would call it a great cycle, where the same topics start resurfacing and people give some of the core answers, and you have to go back and say, well, this is what we discussed that time, but we didn't have this particular nuance. And there would be a kind of, well, it's this 1994. How could there possibly be racists in America now? We are so far advanced, and we would just say like, oh yeah, we've heard that one before since 1972. And they're still seeing it now. People saying, oh, this is 2007. How could Gina, this nuisance happen? Blah, 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 blah. So there's all kinds of interesting kind of details that you can capture, and some that you can't because of the dynamism of discovery, where you have to be part of an active discussion and active discovery. So at some point, I even having been the fact keeper, just got completely dispirited with the whole ability for flamers to come in, derail the discussion, and it was driving the high quality people away. And I was one of the people who just said, forget it. You guys can have it. I don't care about it this much to put up with this kind of abuse, and so I'm going to go back to a private forum. So I went to a bunch of different private forums as the web was evolving and maturing. I went to Salon. I was in one of the first, the Salon had something they called the Race Project, and I was part of that. I joined Electric Minds. There was a site called Electric Minds, and these are what I would call web chat, where you actually had the browser-based communications. The well could be browser-based, but it was really, the better was the command line interface for the well. And all the bulletin boards were certainly like that. I was in CompuServe, I was in Prodigy, I was in any number of those prior to 93, when Mosaic came out and Windows 3.1 had IP stacks that you had to buy from third parties. I was in Panix.com, the public access Unix with Alexis Rosen in New York City. I was involved there. I got into New York Online for a short period of time, but I was not a Mac person. Although I was an artistic person, I wasn't necessarily a Mac person because I was primarily a database person, and everybody knows Mac doesn't do database. And so I kind of just missed Omar Wasow at that point. I was involved with Café Los Negros, which was also an interesting kind of thing. McLean Graves was involved in that. I knew all the Black Bulletin Board owners. I hung out with with Art McGee, Art Rambo McGee, also one of those guys that you'll hear as an original founder. Idette Vaughn. I was with Idette Vaughn. I was with Arthur Findlater, Findlater. I watched Findlater get into trouble with Boardwatch magazine when Boardwatch magazine was all that before the internet. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and I met and hung out with Arthur he was also a mad genius. He was one of those guys who actually had a 500 area code phone number in 1995. He understood everything about communications backbones and AT&T and all that fun stuff. Interesting guy. I think he just left the States because he wanted to take over the telephone company of Bermuda or Jamaica or someplace like that. Did I say Arthur? It was Walt Findlater. What a character. I wish I could find out where he is. But also any number of guys. There was a guy involved with the Urban League whose name I can't remember. He wasn't a practitioner, but he talked about the theory a lot. A friend of mine told me about one of these guys who was very influential in bridging the digital divide. I've always had the theory that the digital divide was a bunch of hokum for non-adepts who didn't believe that this technology would democratize. I always did believe it would, and would become cheap before there was even a Best Buy. Excuse me. At any rate, I was at Salon, I was at Slate, I was at Cafe Utney. Slate had some interesting folks too. Some of the most interesting of those guys moved over to another place called The Moat. And all of this was also based on the layer of technology that enabled web chat. So Slate built theirs from scratch. The Moat was a takeoff on that. And then Brainstorms was, of course, one of the best. And Brainstorms was a place where people who didn't want to get into the really vociferous flame wars that were taking over the well and had gone through the well cycles as the well became more popular and opened up to the public. And a great deal of thoughtful discussion over there, and some real hands-on experts in all various manners of expertise. And as I spent time in Brainstorms, which this would be the mid 90s and coming to the late 90s, I was certainly there for at least 3 years. It's when I realized that the power of a community collecting news online would be dangerous to what we now call MSM media. Now here's another chapter that I need to talk about, which is the chapter of meanderings. I mentioned that two of the black folks that I knew from the well were Farai Chideya and Bill Berry. Now Bill Berry founded a place called Meanderings, and I'm trying to remember the other name for it because it had two different names. Gravity was the second name, and Bill single-handedly from scratch built on an Apple, on a Mac, a web chat engine that he called Meanderings, and he created the singularly most creative black intellectual discussion forum that has ever been. It is still the model. There has never been anything that's really come close to it. If I may have come close to it with Vision Circle, that would be a great compliment to me, but he had, as Kuda Lee Brown, created Meanderings, which was absolutely fabulous. And there, Lester Spence was there as well. Bill Benson was there, and Bill Benson is also one of the most intelligent guys I know. He's a polymath. He has a library to die for. He's a master of the trumpet. And we got into riffs, lyrical intelligent stuff that really is incredible. There's a good associate of mine, friend, who I've actually never met in many years, who's gone by many different names, but I finally know his real name, Craig Newland, and he lives in Kansas City someplace, who would have loved Gravity and Meanderings. So Meanderings grew into Gravity. If the archives are available, it would be a testament to brilliance in our time, and that was just one great place where we really did some interesting stuff. I also got a chance to meet one of the guys who was the founder of Net Noir, Malcolm Cassell, and Malcolm was a fascinating personality who talks faster than me, talks faster than most people, and was a product of that very fast-paced South Soma community, south of Market, in San Francisco. And I met him one day for lunch, and I would mention that back before I came back to the West Coast, I moved to the West Coast in '97. I grew up here, but I moved back in '97 because I had been in New York and Boston and Atlanta. Myself and a friend of mine named Charles Isbell out of MIT built, based on the premise of IMDb, a Black History database where we expected people to do some collaboration, and we said, we'd like to put Black History out on the web, and so this is interesting for Black History Month, and I hope that people will be watching this for Black History Month to talk about the history of blacks on the web in terms of our collaboration and communication. We built the Black History database, and I came up with the interface design mostly, and then Charles coded the whole thing, and he built it, and we got written up in the Boston Globe, and one of the cool things about it was that it wasn't kind of a one-way communication. The CGI interface had just been built, and so the web, which originally started as a kind of a publisher's medium, where it's just one way, I put my web space up there, and you just navigate to the page and do nothing but read it, became a two-way interface, and we said, we gotta take advantage of that. So it was something that we would allow people to contribute to. And it was the first, content management systems. These were the first content management systems. We were building them from scratch, so Bill Berry and Charles Isbell deserve some props for doing that stuff. Way back in the early days when people were saying, "There's not going to be any black people on the internet. We're not interested. We've got hip hop, and it's a white thing, and there's a digital divide, and we're never going to do X, Y, or Z." Meanwhile, there are legions of black folks who are already in the sciences, who are involved in it, and just kind of waiting. When are you guys going to get over here? You should check it out. It's interesting. I was at Boston, hanging out with some of the people at South End Press, and that whole literary community, and saying, if you want to have this unlimited forum where you can talk about all the issues that African Americans might be interested in, you just got to get online. And I went to famously, my famous complaint as I went to a black professors convention at MIT. I met Robin D.G. Kelly. I met Cornel West. I met Lenny Guinier. I met a number of folks and said, "Hey, internet, it's going to happen." And I had my baseball cap on, and I wore it backwards, and I had my email address on my baseball cap because I was at Panix.com, which was one of the first public access Unix places where we used to do things with tools like Archie and Veronica and Waze. I mean, if you got to the well, then you knew about Ed Kroll, and you had Ed Kroll's book, The Whole Internet, and you understood the whole thing, and the Mondo 2000 and the RU Sirius and the deep geek stuff that kind of notes us and that says, hey, this guy's been a deep geek for a long time. And I have, because, you know, I didn't work at Park, but my buddies worked at Park. And I was one of the Zeroids, the Xerox folks. And I've always thought that kind of Douglas Copeland had been secretly following my life when he wrote Microserfs as the Black X Zeroid. So you can confirm or deny that, Doug, but you probably wouldn't know me. Anyway, so I did meet Malcolm Cassell in San Francisco, and he seemed to be a completely different breed. And this was kind of prefacing the dot-com revolution. Before I had moved back out to San Francisco, I just had a contract with Charles Schwab. I was building something for them. But I got a chance to meet him. I also got a chance to meet Howard Rheingold for the first time. And there was some kind of fair or protest or something in one of these parks south of Market. And I cannot remember exactly what it was. And, you know, I was suited up. I do financial software, so I'm accustomed to wearing the suit and tie. And I showed up at this thing, and there's people who are tattooed and pierced, wearing pancake makeup or half naked, and I was just amazed. But I also saw a parallel between that and you know, the white liberals that show up on MLK Day in the hood that one time of the year, and they hand out the Socialist Workers Party kind of propaganda and say, we're all brothers, right on. Overthrow the system, power to the people. And I was like, I have seen this circus before. So that was another tiny light bulb going on inside my head saying, you know, this is weirdness, and I don't belong here. At the same time, there was this whole dynamic in San Francisco, in the South of Market crowd, that was driving a lot of the tech in Silicon Valley, at least the social side of the technology. So if you wanted to talk about, in the late 90s, collaborative software, if you wanted to talk about using the power of the internet to displace old network paradigms of communicating, you were necessarily in this kind of libertarian, leftist, strange, anarchic kind of space. And it was kind of a fast-talking, you know, we can do this kind of thing, mixed with, you know, a lot of cynicism, I would say, for the corporate stuff. And I think Cassell kind of represented half of that, and the other half, which was, we're going to make a deal with these venture capitalists, and we're going to get the money, and we're going to be able to sell this thing and make money, and they're doing this while they're eating sushi. So I had been on the East Coast long enough, even though I'm a West Coast person, to look at this kind of like, and but Netwar happened, and I assume they made profit, and they did well for themselves, and that was another piece, because Isabel and I were thinking about selling the Black History database to Netwar as a product, but we weren't successful in doing that, and I'm not exactly sure the details of how that happened, but it didn't happen. But it's okay, because we just, you know, went forward and did the things that we were. Neither myself or Charles was able to monetize, because again, we were still living in an era in the United States where Unix and client-server computing was kind of foreign, outside of the realm of corporate IT. So you could either make money at Sun Microsystems, or you could not make money. There just wasn't a huge profitability kind of thing there, and especially if you were talking with the Rheingolds of the world in terms of their ideas moving them forward more than anything else. And I don't know if Stuart Brand was born with money or not, or if he was just one of those people who just decided that he was going to be what he was going to be, and let his vision guide him. But there's probably an interesting history of how internet pioneers like Vint Cerf actually got the corporate sponsorship and the scientific recognition, whereas other people would build stuff and never get rich off of it, obviously, but had a great deal to do with the shaping of the intellectual content that came about by being facilitated by these networks of communication. And I think Gerard is probably an excellent example of that, who's been really somebody who has seen a lot and has participated a lot in the shape of what the blogosphere has become. So the next chapter we should talk about is the beginning of the blogosphere. And the beginning of the blogosphere would have to date for me to right around 2000, because I think that's when radio first came out. And I was still in Brainstorms, hanging out with the guys at Brainstorms, and of course, you know, we had the tech, interesting and cool things that were happening, and so radio came out, and this was at the time where, you know, everybody had their own domain, or at least, you know, if you were cool. And of course, I had my own domain, nbcbowen.org, and I did something to build kind of identity pages. The whole thing was, you have a home page, and I built a home page, but I wanted mine to be more, because again, I was interested in cultural production from an African American cutting edge perspective, and that's because of my own history in performance poetry that began in Los Angeles and ended up in New York when I got into the black literary scene there. And so my idea was I was going to write poetry that was going to save hip hop, but I didn't realize the aesthetics of hip hop producers in early 90s New York, when Onyx was taking over the world, and I kind of found out the hard way. At any rate, my interest in building a website had to do with my own continuing evolution as a thinker, and my own evolving. You know, where's my poetry going to go? How am I going to put this in the context of this entire black consciousness revolution that is continuing? And what am I going to do to use the web as a tool for communications? So I built the Cool Zone. And the Cool Zone was my first website, or second website, I'm not sure. And the Cool Zone had several different planes of the Cool Zone. And there were elements, and there were peoples, and there was poetry, and there was the neighborhood project. And ultimately, probably the most significant thing that I did out of the Cool Zone, which actually had gone past that. Well, I don't know. Well, I built the Race Man's Home Companion, which was my own set of evolved positions, inspired partially by me, and partially by Kwame Anthony Appiah, and partially by Cornel West, and partially by the lack of other stuff that I saw out there that was anything like this. And so, as the drum continued on, and I built the Cool Zone, the drum kind of changed at North Carolina A&T. Oh my goodness. I'm just realizing that Carter Bing may live in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I was there a couple years ago for a conference, and I didn't look him up. At any rate, I built a cool zone, and it included some of my own poetry and works, and it was included in this list that Carter Bing had put together. And one of the things that I had done was I had started getting on a particular angle of cultural production, which was anti-racist. So I created a persona called the Boohab, and one of the interesting things that happened is while I was living in Atlanta, I would write stuff about anti-racism, and I would get all kinds of hits and sometimes emails from people who were looking for the Southern Poverty Law Center. So, kind of in a last-ditch attempt to do something that I had wanted to do for many years, which was build individual websites for all the black clubs and organizations and 501c3s, etc., that the myth of the digital divide convinced them that they shouldn't do, or shouldn't attempt, or shouldn't try to make me rich building, was that I got to the SPLC. I said, oh, I'm getting a lot of hits. Maybe I can build you guys a website. And of course, I suppose it's reasonable to assume that the guy that I talked to on the phone, Noah, would not trust me just because I was the guy who was getting these hits. And so he says, no, we'll build our own website. And so I kind of got the feeling, I'm like, I'm the only one out here in the whole World Wide Web who's building anything that counters racism in the United States. And, the people who are putting the Klan out of business won't even do business with me. And so it was an interesting thing during those early 90s to be a pioneer, and this whole idea that black people don't exist, or race doesn't exist in cyberspace. So I got into those existential issues. I cited Heidegger and a bunch of folks, and that's the context of which I got into Salon and Cafe Utney and the Moat, which was an outgrowth of Slate, and got into those big discussions, the things that made Sherman Alexie very popular with the NPR crowd, because we got into that, and also with David Horowitz. And the interesting thing is that I got into a big discussion with David Horowitz over the LA riots. And I remember saying, David, there's so much that you don't understand about what people were actually thinking and feeling on the ground in LA that I don't even care that you don't know. It's not. I'm not even going to try to impress you anymore. And he said so. He said, you're such a good writer. It's too bad that you're not on the right, because I could get you money from Siaf. I can't pronounce the guy's name. I haven't heard it pronounced. I've read it a million times. But the Melon Skyaf, the guy who funds a lot of David Horowitz and a lot of the right on the web, and that kind of idea stuck in my head. I was like, yeah, that was interesting. But I didn't find in David Horowitz an adequate foil. My best foil has been Jim Rutt at the Well, because we agree to disagree at the most civilized level that I'd had. And it'd be interesting to go back to the Well, because they keep their archives forever. But anyway, I was there. I was made a team captain at Cafe Utney for their society conference, and that is when I kind of created Boohab as this alternate persona to manage the race man kinds of things. I mean, it was something I'm interested in, I was interested in, and I had passionate. It's a compelling issue. It's a stochastic, not easy to answer question that's more interesting than the technical questions that give me the six-figure salary. But the social issues are a lot more interesting to deal with. and it's been my avocation for many years. So out of this, all of these times, the radio blogger thing, you just made a homepage. It was just like nobody was saying, somebody might say, well, I debugged my code today, or other geek speak. There wasn't any way to hook all the blogs together. And so when weblogs first came out, they were in every way inferior to what web chat was. So when you had the Gate, I was on the Gate for San Jose Mercury News, people would really be engaging the issues of the day, and you would have folks like, my friend Frank Vahafric, I seem to recall him, and some other folks, who were really getting into the social issues and questions of the day, and we could engage them at length. We could overcome time and space. And so there wasn't a really reason to blog. So roundabout the time that Trent Lott made his infamous comment, and I can't remember exactly what it was, someone from Brainstorms, it was probably Bill Benson, said, the blogosphere, he didn't say it in so many words, but the blogosphere is out there, and you could probably make something out of writing. I mean, what you write here, you tend to, go on and on a little bit. Your length is a bit longer than web chat, because you've been in the web chat for so long. You can't just do a paragraph. You do 7 paragraphs. You do 10 paragraphs. So maybe you ought to be out there writing some of that stuff, because it's very unique. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll try it out. And that is when I began my blog. And so I first began my blog with radio, and I had handcrafted it. I put the thing together by hand, and wrote the links and rewrote the links, and I was fairly proficient at HTML. So I built that, and I started off with Kwanzaa. And what had happened, as legendarily so, I guess now, if my blog means anything, Ann Coulter and a couple other folks had, just gone off on Kwanzaa. And I'm like, you guys have no clue. So I started writing my blog about Kwanzaa. And then when I finally got over to, and I built a couple other things too, one tangentially with X Republic, which may or may not be the thing that actually gets me anywhere, and then I said, okay, I'm going to write about what it's like to be, me, to be an African American man in the upper middle class doing what I do. And I'd already gone through the Buhabian thing, and I already spent a lot of time discussing with people in all the online forums. I had become the Kibo of race. I had become what I planned to be was a persistent black object, which was going to be the black guy who's always in your face saying, well, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that, or did you think consideration that maybe this is the way you ought to be thinking? And I wasn't dropping the R-bomb, you are a racist. I was just making people really think about why they believe what they believe, and if they believed anything that was actually principled racist. And I built I built a Race Man's Home Companion for the purpose of getting racism out of American politics, which was an interesting goal in and of itself. But by the time I was ready to blog, I had put those Race Man things aside. I had put them aside, I don't remember exactly what year, maybe 98. And I generally tie it to the death of my last grandmother in Louisiana. But at any rate, I said, okay, here's where I am. I am kind of an enemy of George Bush. I am an enemy of Osama bin Laden. I believe both of these people can constitute a threat to my liberty. Obviously, bin Laden is a greater threat, but I think George Bush is a threat to my liberty too. And so I began my blog kind of on that, and I started with the image of Mo Green and the Olympic track team who had won the gold medal, and they had their big American flag. And I said, this is what it's like to be me. You could be the absolute best in the world, and you could be a patriot and carry the American flag high, and people will still find a reason to disrespect you. And I said, that's kind of be the theme of Cobb, which was the name of my blog. And I wanted to be a little bit contrarian and a little bit conservative, but I hadn't had my epiphany where I said, oh shoot, I should be a conservative. And this was somewhere around 2000, because the memory of the Sydney Games was fresh in my mind. I had been there. So I started the blog, and now we're actually at the point where we can say, here's the chapter where the blogosphere begins. Now, I was probably a year, maybe a year and a half late to the origin of the blogosphere. And I can't remember exactly which version of movable type I picked finally, after I had exhausted my time with radio, and I had converted several months of radio blog and my own personal blog, which was a little bit dynamic, to movable type. But I had already decided that I was going to be conservative, if not Republican. And I had created Cobb from my middle name, Michael David Cobb Bowen, and Cobb is the most conservative part of my name. Now, it must be said that the longer time goes forward, the less I think I know about what the black blogosphere is. I know where it was. I know where it's come from. I know my transition from alternate media online into what has become the blogosphere itself. But the blogosphere, the black blogosphere, or every corner of the blogosphere, kind of changes in shape as time goes by. I think right now, the interest, now meaning January 2008, the interest of the black blogosphere, oh no, it's February, it's Black History Month. And today is February 4th, it's a Monday. The black blogosphere kind of came to life, or came to prominence, after this Gina, and the guy from the Chicago Sun-Times, Witt, I think is his name, or I want to say DeWitt, but I'm not sure if it is, who was kind of highlighted. He said, oh, there's a spontaneous eruption of black blogs out there, when in fact the impetus and the modus operandi of people who are core to the black blogosphere has existed for a long time. So let me first start by saying, here are the people who I think are the kings of the black blogosphere, and they would be George Kelly, first of all. George Kelly is the godfather of the black blogosphere. There is nobody who doesn't know him and who was not shepherded in some way and got traffic directed to their blog in some way, except through George Kelly. He is in the black, what Art McGee was in the BBS world. And Carter Bing was the king of the BBSs with the drum, and McGee was his emissary. I'm trying to say this in mystical forms, I am Shiva, destroyer of worlds, or something, and this is my emissary. Or is that the myth of the Silver Surfer, or something like that? Anyway, George Kelly put together All About George, obviously, and George participated in all the South by Southwest conferences, and naturally he was connected to the whole south of Market San Francisco vibe. But I'd let him speak towards that. Then there's Oliver Willis, who was a guy out there, who was a pioneer, often disrespected. And then there's Earl Donovan. Earl Donovan is a current king. He's a past, present, and future king of the Black Blogosphere. Anybody who does not know Prometheus 6, who does not have a link to Prometheus 6, really doesn't know what they're talking about when it comes to dealing with politics and culture on the web from a black partisan standpoint. He's been there. He's going to be there. He, like Bill Cooterly Brown Berry, has built stuff from scratch, has integrated multiple technologies over multiple generations, and has maintained a serious audience for serious subjects for a very long time. He is almost peerless. He is almost peerless. The most serious of the interlocutors at P6 are also some of the pioneers of the Black Blogosphere. That would include myself, although I've been banned. That would include Del Jeans. Del Jeans is also a guy from the Midwest who has kind of an offline component to his online advocacy, and he has done everything except stop short of saying, "Oh, I'm a conservative," in terms of his attitude towards his politics and his community service and the things that he's doing, the things that he was doing online. And his last thing was called Adequate Defense. So if you talk about the serious Black Blogosphere, he would be there. There's Poppin' Politics, and Poppin' Politics, I believe, was originally Farai. Originally, Farai Chideya started Poppin' Politics as she went from New York Online to the Well and back and forth, and then she started her own thing, which was Poppin' Politics. It was very early, and that would be a very old blog. I'm sure it's gone through several generations. The primary value of the Black Blogosphere is that it avoids the mess that we got into with SCAA and Usenet, in that it is owned and operated and controlled by the individuals whose editorial vision they want to get out there. And when it was in the public domain, when you were in Usenet, when you were in Salon, when you're in Utne, you can't say, "Go away, you are destroying the quality of this conversation." You do not have that control. And so people had the nerve to come in and flame, and flaming was the kind of disrespectful, general, low netiquette level of communications that nobody ever wanted. If you ever wanted to have constructive criticism or constructive stuff, of your publication, aesthetically as well as in terms of content, is what separates the Black Blogosphere from every other previous inception or communicative vehicle of the web, because it was not owned or operated by us, and so we could not necessarily have a black conversation. And there were times when you did want to have a black conversation, when it was like, "No white folks allowed, sorry, go, you gotta go, you got the whole other internet to go, but you can't come here. You don't have to go home, but you got to get the hell out of here." And sometimes you wanted to do that, and sometimes you wanted to have, you know, a multicultural kind of discussion, and sometimes you didn't. And the whole point was, can you actually control that? Can you say this is a black website? And so from my perspective, that was a godsend. It was great. I never really had a problem getting my point across, but you know, I have a few writing skills, and I have a little bit more patience, and I have a higher view, and therefore there's some things I can tolerate, and some things I know when to nudge people off the edge. So Earl Dunavant is one of the folks who's been able to create his Prometheus 6 from scratch and build that kind of awareness, like, look, I'm the boss here, I'm the master of, if you start with the BS, boom, you're gone. And so he did that. And then, of course, LaShawn Barber was extraordinarily successful in her aim to bring a Christian conservative viewpoint across into the websphere, the blogosphere. There are several others. I created Vision Circle, and Vision Circle was an attempt to do, because it became clear to me at a certain point that I wanted to bring the black conservative point of view into the mainstream of politics, because of some long-standing lessons that I have learned over the many years that I've been involved with these kinds of discussions. And I recognized that it wasn't going to be popular, it wasn't going to be something that everybody would immediately understand, but it was a necessary perspective that had to be personified from something different than an abstract kind of thing. And so there was already Project 21, there was already Michael Massey, Jesse Lee Peterson, and a couple other folks out there who had put forth conservative black ideas. I don't want to pretend like I was the first guy out there, but I also had a certain amount of respect for black progressive politics, being that that's my family history, and also that I recognized that I was conservative, and I had beef with notable conservatives who get more action. And so you know, my stand on Kwanzaa was the first kind of shot across that bow. And so I created Vision Circle, and I said, you know, let's invite some folks over here, including Dr. Spence and a whole bunch of other people, so we could start writing about the issues of the day and coming at it from different perspectives. And the whole idea was you're not going to have a complete vision until you've made a circle. So you dealt with left, right, and center. And I invited several writers there, and Ed Brown came, and it was a good thing for several years. So that was kind of a core piece. Cobb became a little bit more notable over time, and then I created the blog leagues, you know, following the conventions of the early blogosphere. Now, where the black blogosphere is different, is that I think there's a little less track backing. There's a little less. It's more kind of a spewing, directly expository, I should say, than a collaborative effort. The first collaborative effort to come out of the black blogosphere is AfroSpear, and AfroSpear is a blog league within the black blogosphere that is probably the largest and the most popular. And those are kind of Jenna-born blogs, which got their start and got their popularity. And even so, you know, I don't read so very many of those. There's a few black blogs that I read, and I'll just go through those because I'm more expository too, and then I have to maintain my own stuff because I got a lot of commenters. So first place I go is Booker Rising. Obviously, Shay Riley has put together a really great blog. It's very popular. she can easily get 50, 100 comments, 150 comments on any particular topic during the week, and she regularly does. She was one of the first people I approached in putting together the Conservative Brotherhood. So I read her stuff all the time. Avery Tooley, Amber Nicole, who has come back in and gone back out and come back in. Michael King, who was in but left. But I also read Lester Spence's Blacksmith. I read Ed Brown's blog. I read Prometheus 6 from time to time. I read Negro File, which is George Kelly's blog, and I think George has been less the locus of a lot of black blog activity than he used to be, which is interesting and somewhat shameful because he really maintains a high quality. There's the new thing by Skip Gates called The Root that I'm periodically visiting, and that is about it in terms of those that influence me. But that's a fraction of those which are influential. There's Black Prof, and Black Prof, and Jack and Jill Politics, and a couple others that I put on my my homies blog roll. Let's see if I actually read these guys, but I know they're all significant at some point or another. Bomani Jones, who does sports writing, and how could I forget Jimmy Israel? Jimmy Israel is one of the best writers on the web today. Period. He's great. I call him the urban griot and star child personified. And Israel is just a class A #1 writer inside of hip hop, inside the club scene. Just a straight shooter with a great vocab and a great sense of prose style. He's going to edit. My guess is he is going to be one of the great editors of our time, and he is going to put together something that's going to knock people's socks off as soon as he gets the time and the money. Let's see, who else do I have here on my list of existential partners? Obviously, I should talk about E.C. Hopkins, whose late lamented Max Ambit blog was probably one of the most, how should I say, intellectually complete and well-disciplined blogs out there. In terms of E.C., he's in law school right now, and so he is writing from first principles and is very broadly well read. A kind of a giant out there, but then he's retired, and you have to understand that these things come in cycles. There are people who come in who play their roles and then ultimately move on. Del Jeans being one of them, and you can only capture them for a moment as they're being prolific, writing in the blogosphere. There's Jack and Jill. There's Faye Anderson, who I don't read as much as I should and as much as I used to. John Hope Bryant also maintains a blog, and he's a mover and shaker out here. There's my frat brother Joseph C. Phillips, who is intimately involved with Republican politics and writes an odd style blog. It's more of a column, but is a warm and wonderful person. I wish I had more time to hang out with him, but definitely a serious contributor. Mac Diva is an old school black blogger, and I should highlight some of these folks who have been there since the beginning, and definitely Mac through my reader. So I'm going to bring those up and point them out too. Some of them are still writing under pseuds, and others are using their real names. Palm Trees in the Ghetto is one that should be read. And let's see, Undercover Black Man is another one that should be read. What's That Smell on Blogspot should be read. Let's see. I think I mentioned Kim Pearson, Professor Kim. Should definitely be read. I am not getting any response from this thing. Sorry about that. Can't edit the video either, so you have to suffer through it with me. But you made it this far, so congratulations. There's only about 3 or 4 minutes left for me to editorialize on. And let's see. New Black Man. I will certainly cite the guy who's writing New Black Man, whose name escapes me right now. Mark is his first name. And I would Mark Anthony Neal, also a good writer who's out there. The Literary Thug. The Literary Thug is the guy who shames me by dealing with serious subjects and very high-minded reviews of classic literature. He's put some poetry out there. Some of it's very good, certainly better than mine. When a lot of people are talking about Naomi Campbell, he's talking about Mary McLeod Bethune. So definitely the Literary Thug is somebody we should keep in mind. There's one called The Struggle Within, which is a very good blog as well. I would obviously promote the Conservative Brotherhood as a unique blog league out there. There aren't but 2 right now. Mine is the first. It's also the smaller one, but it offers a very unique insight into what folks in the middle and the right are thinking along the black political spectrum. What I think is the future for the black blogosphere, I think new voices obviously will come on board, and hopefully I can be part of shepherding them in. I would hope that there's going to be a little bit more intra-communication between blogs, but let me also mention 2 very strong up-and-coming blogs, which are influential in their own right. First is Michael Fisher's blog, The Assault on Black People's Sanity, which is definitely very popular. Then there's The Field Negro, which is Wayne Bennett, also very popular and new blog that's attracting a lot of attention. So these are going to be leaders and shapers of black opinion, which is happening more and more online. There were several attempts to do it from a corporate perspective, and they have failed to sustain their audiences and the advertising, and that's an interesting story that one of those editors should bring up, and it'll be interesting to see, excuse me, if Skip Gates and PBS people and the sponsors of The Root are going to be able to deal with those economic realities. Because right now there hasn't been a way to really capture enough of a stone African American demographic, a strict demographic, to sustain a commercial project for more serious political commentary and cultural criticism, which is kind of my specialty. And black voices kind of faded away. There was another one that I think Faye Anderson was involved in that they advertised on Slate, and I'm sorry that I can't remember the name of that one. But these are guys who are going to be independent voices, and I think they're going to keep carrying the conversation forward. And peace.